It's current year, goddammit. I want to be able to play all my Game Boy Advance games on a system that I'll really enjoy playing them on. Well, first off, welcome. Second, calm down. That's not a very good argument for anything. Anyway, welcome to the video. We're going to be showing you some Game Boy Advance systems today, and a bit of a buyer's guide as well. So starting off, I'd like to talk about this guy, the original, the OG as the cool kids would call it. That's Original Gangster. The original model, Game Boy Advance, released in 2001. This is probably one of Nintendo's most successful handhelds ever. I think it's in their top 3 best-selling handhelds ever. I think it was eventually replaced by the 3DS, but yeah, this thing held its title for a very, very long time, through the DS era. DS couldn't even outsell it as far as I remember, but anyway. So, the original model, Game Boy Advance, has a couple perks. A lot of people do kind of shit on it looking back, but I think it's still a great handheld. For starters, buttons are really nice, face buttons especially. The D-pad is really nice. The bumpers on the top are comfortable, but they aren't very tactile, and they kind of do wear out over time. This one in particular has. This is the only system that uses AA batteries. Well, at least the official Nintendo one that uses AA batteries. Later ones would go and use lithium-ion, which, rechargeable ones, which was nice. But this one will probably last the longest because, what tends to die first are those batteries. They just kind of lose their charge and they just don't charge anymore. But anyway. You got a headphone jack, you got your volume control, and you got your on switch right here. Now, the biggest problem with the Game Boy Advance is the screen. There's a lot of glare. There is a lack of a backlight or a front light. It's very difficult to see. You can see it a lot easier on camera here, but it still looks like crap. And that's unfortunate. Yeah, viewing angles in particular aren't very good on pretty much any of the Game Boy Advance systems, or even some of the DS systems, which is a problem they haven't really fixed until pretty much the 3DS. I mean, it's not too big of a deal, you just gotta hold it the right direction, but then again, if you don't hold it, you need to have, good viewing angle to good sunlight ratio. It's just a pain that a lot of people don't want to deal with. Now, in addition to that, one of the other cons was there's nothing going over the screen here to protect it. Now, later models would have the SP, though that would have something like a clamshell design where it would protect the screen. This, not so much. The screen doesn't get too scratched up, but if you're the type of person that likes putting rocks in their pocket or sand, yeah, you're gonna have a bad time. The advantages of the Game Boy Advance, the original model, having it today: ergonomics and full compatibility, which is nice. Now, I should mention that this is a mono-only system, unless you plug in a headset, in which you get good old stereo. The compatibility-wise, like I mentioned, you have all the ones that have motion controls, gyroscopes and accelerometers, Kirby's Tilt and Tumble, and Yoshi's Topsy-Turvy, to name a few that you can, when you move your Game Boy Advance around. And of course, you also have the e-reader functionality where you can trade between e-readers or other Game Boy Advance systems. I really don't pay attention to the e-reader, and that's a terrible peripheral, but I just thought I'd mention it because the port right here and the cartridge are in the top of the system, so that's how you have full compatibility, which is nice. So yeah, that's a Game Boy Advance for you. Pretty decent system. It's also cheap, so yeah, cheap, fully compatible, and decent buttons and good ergonomics overall. So, if you want to pick it up, pretty good, pretty cheap too. Under 50 bucks, I'd say. No more than 50, absolutely. Now, if you want to spend a little bit more than that, you can maybe get one of these guys. The Game Boy Advance SP. Now, these came in 2 models. I only have one with me today. That's the front lip model. It's a flash card. Let's actually plug this in right now, just to give you a demonstration. Yeah, you can notice the glare here, but you can turn that off, but then you won't see anything, which is a bit of a shame. There we go. Everything was a lot better now. Anyway, so there are some drawbacks of using SP. Now, the buttons are decent. They're different. They're not as tactile. We would actually use the same button, almost exactly the same, as they do on the DS. Still only a mono speaker, but this time around there's no built-in headphone jack. You have to use an adapter on the top here, but it does have a lithium-ion rechargeable battery. But because it's smaller, it cramps in your hand. Now, if you play like this, it's a lot better, But if you use that jack, you have to like have your fingers like this. It's a little bit painful to do that for long hours if you want to listen to stereo. And you can't even do that if you want to charge the system as well. About the same battery life too. But it's pretty good for casual play. I would say you're not going to be playing it for super long hours if you're going to, play only a couple of games every now and then. Obviously, volume control on the side, power switch. It's a decent overall system. One of the other complaints I have are the buttons on the top. The bumpers are just small, and they sometimes, and like over time, I understand that this one, I've used this for most of my childhood, and this thing has gotten beaten up, but the bumpers really have seen better days, and they just don't work too well anymore. But you do have that connection port on the top. So advantages of this guy, while it is still a little bit expensive, you do have that nice front-lit screen, good battery life to accompany it, decent buttons, and well, yeah, that's pretty much it. The backlight is pretty much the main selling factor, and of course the clamshell design. But you do have, it's less ergonomical to some people. You don't have that full compatibility with the e-reader, which some people don't really care about. But you don't have very good compatibility with the motion controls, which a lot of people do care about. So before we move on to the Game Boy Player, there was one other last system Nintendo released as part of the Game Boy Advance lineup, and this was around the beginning of the DS. In fact, it was right around the corner, the same year, and that's the Game Boy Micro. A tiny little system. Look at this thing. Look at that. It's so tiny. If you buy this, you're obviously compensating for something. But anyway, it's got an all-metallic construction. The buttons feel really nice. It's really small, so you're going to have to get used to that. But once you do, it is a really nice system. And the bumpers are the best yet. Now, there are some drawbacks to it, and some positives, of course. It's a very in-between, really weird middle. It's not even really a middle system. It just has some weird steps forward and steps back. For one's, the size. Hands can cramp up on that, but it does retain the headphone jack that the original Game Boy Advance did, which is nice. Unfortunately, you do not have compatibility with Game Boy Color and Game Boy games, so that kind of sucks. If you're only playing Game Boy Advance games, that's fine, but if you want that backwards compatibility, well, that kind of sucks. Although you could possibly run an emulator, a flashcard emulator, and you can probably achieve some kind of result, depending. Like I hear Goomba Color works fine with some flashcards, but anyway. It no longer has the link cable port, and it has a completely different charging port than either the SP or any of the DS systems. And you even have different levels of brightness, which is kind of cool. You have to hold L and the volume rocker on the side here. Instead of a slider, it's a rocker, as I just mentioned. And you even have removable faceplates here. There's two versions of these in existence. There's the Famicom for the 25th anniversary of Nintendo, I assume. And then there's the silver model, and you can remove the faceplates on both. Still mono, but you do have that headphone jack, which is always nice. Yeah, I really like the quality of this. Unfortunately, it's a little bit expensive. $130 this one cost me complete in box, and that's one of the things I will say is that if you can, find a system that's comes with the box, because usually they actually, if they're taking care of the box, they'll take even better care of the system itself, which is kind of always nice. A nice little rule of thumb. And this one is, yeah, still holds up pretty well, but it feels like I've almost just taken this thing out of the box, like brand new. It's like no one ever used this thing. It's a pretty cool system, but it is very expensive, but it is pretty tiny. Unfortunately, no screen cover either, so that is a bit of a shame, but this one seemed to have held up pretty well over the years. But yeah, metallic finish, probably will last a lot longer. It's probably the system you want to get if you don't want to invest into a DS and you want something as small as possible and something with a good screen. You don't mind size. If you don't mind size and money's not an issue, maybe give this thing a look. It's not too bad. But we have one more system. It's not portable. And this is probably one of the best peripherals Nintendo or any company's ever released for a console, and that's the Game Boy Player. The Game Boy Player is a literal must-have if you own a GameCube and a Game Boy Advance library. So what happens is that you just plug it into the bottom of the GameCube and you basically screw it in, and it actually makes your GameCube an actual cube. But the GameCube is actually not a cube until you add this thing on it. It adds the right dimension to it. So you have the port here, and you pretty much have full compatibility, which is nice. Obviously, you're not going to be playing. I mean, you could. Like Kirby's Tilt and Tumble or Yoshi's Topsy Turvy. If you hold the GameCube like this, and then you like look at the screen, you can do that. But you're going to break it, probably. But you can do it. Link cable compatibility, it's nice. It doesn't have a lot of borders, and you do need to find one thing very important. If you're going to get one of these things, make sure you get the software disc that comes with it. That's kind of actually becoming a little bit of a rare thing now, is to find that. These things, pretty easy to find. The disc, not so much. Make sure it comes with a disc. You also have a nice little eject system. See, I wasn't lying. And yeah, it's a pretty solid peripheral. You can the only problem is that the GameCube controllers, they have really terrible D-pads on them. Now there was one controller that Hori released that works with it. It's in the style of an original SNES pad, and you can play, you can play the Game Boy Advance games on that. But the problem with the SNES pad is that it's really rare and incredibly expensive, unfortunately. So yeah, it is a bit of an issue. There's some third-party solutions you can try, but generally, yeah, playing with a GameCube controller is just not very good. You're better off playing on the original handheld systems. You do have the benefit of a TV, but yeah, unless you really don't care about portability and controls, I mean, give this thing a shot. It can be potentially cheaper than an SP, and definitely cheaper than a Micro, although that does vary depending on your region. Some of these things can sell well in some places, but anyway. So that's about it for the Game Boy Advance specific systems. Let's look into the next generation. So, backwards compatibility. It's always nice to have. We saw that with the Game Boy Advance and Game Boy Color and Game Boy games. And now we have the DS, the dual screen. This is my original DS. This is one of the few systems that I've been able to keep onto, that I haven't lost, that hasn't been destroyed. It's just, and it's starting to fall apart. Hinge wasn't too good. They were designed for a lot of drop tests, and this thing, let me tell you, has survived a lot of years. I'm retiring it. It's a good system. Very chunky too, and it didn't keep the square. It's got the shape, but it didn't. It's more rectangular, but it did keep a much more ergonomic. It's heavier, but it's a lot more ergonomic than the later iterations of the DS. I still like this one a lot, and the shoulder buttons are also quite nice. It's got that SP feel style of buttons, aside from the shoulders, of course. Stereo speakers, holy crap, we finally have it. We're finally there. We got the headphone jack. Unfortunately, no Game Boy and Game Boy Color compatibility. But you do have, your backlit screen, and you even have like a microphone port this time around. Obviously, there's no jack for connecting Game Boy Advance systems because, well, that'd be a little bit silly. You do have the charging port, which is the exact same as the SP. But yeah, DS is the original model DS. If you like the feel of it, definitely give it a shot. It's pretty cheap. If you can find an old used one, but some of these do. This system was launched in 2005. That's 11 years ago. So make sure you get one that's properly working from a reputable seller, because I've imagined that a lot of these things just don't work too well anymore. All right, so the final system that we have today of the Nintendo official lineup, the DS Lite. Now, interesting, the DS Lite might actually be the best, most affordable system to play all your Game Boy Advance games on. How about that? The best system to play your Game Boy Advance games on is not entirely designed for the Game Boy Advance. In fact, you can actually get these things new. I just got this one. Now, I recommend very carefully considering where you're getting them, because I'm seeing a lot come out of China very cheaply, so I'm assuming some of them are possibly knockoffs. Yeah, so do be careful of where you buy some of these systems. There are some knockoffs, but the DS Lites, I've been able to see some of these. I just got this one brand new for under 80 bucks, and surprisingly, it's really nice. Now, the screen, really nice and bright, really bright. So we have the brightest screens, folks. There's a Trump meme for you. And of course, it works with your flashcards. Unfortunately, still, it doesn't work with your old Game Boy Color games. Here, look, here's memes. Anyway, it's a horrible fighting game. But it does have some decent tactile buttons. The buttons feel a little bit cheaper, but they're still functional. And the buttons on the top, this is where Nintendo kind of adopted like this smoother, curvier bumper buttons they've just been using today. Some people like them, some people hate them. I'm in kind of the I'm in the camp of not liking them very much. Like, I just think they could be a lot better, like the original Game Boy Advance or even the DS ones or the Micro, for God's sakes. But yeah, it's a pretty good system overall. Got great battery life, and of course you have the full library of DS games, so not too much to complain about. Also, the charging port, again, is very different, a little bit smaller than the Game Boy Micro, something to consider. And of course, you know, you got your stylus and all that. Lithium-ion battery. Pretty good system overall, and I believe you can only get them in certain colors now, brand new. You can look around and get some other varieties. This is my original crimson red. Really like the design of this, the color. But yeah, overall, that's pretty much my analysis and buyer's guide to all the Game Boy Advance and DS and all that crap. Like, God, how much money have I spent on all this? Probably like upwards of $500 for all these systems over the years. But, I mean, if you want to play the Game Boy Advance games, I would recommend probably the SP or the DS Lite. If you really want to get something that is more of a collector's item, but also has its uses, the Micro is pretty good. If you don't have a lot of money, definitely give the Game Boy Advance a look, give it a play, see if you can, like, you know, I don't know, if you go to a local swap meet, turn it on, see if you like the feel of it and you can stand the atrocious screen. There's something here for everyone, I'd say, and the Game Boy Player is pretty great for content creators when you want to record Game Boy Advance footage. It's really nice. Anyway, guys, I'll see you next time. Do give my Everdrive X5 review a look. I'm out.